Welcome to the South Australian Drought Hub podcast, strengthening drought resilience for our farmers and regional communities.
$168 million. It's a lot of money, and it's the estimate of what heat stress is costing the Australian sheep industry in terms of a reduction in potential lambs each year. It adds up to a significant impediment to the sector. The good news, though, is there's detailed research being undertaken to change this. G'day, I'm Drew Radford, and to delve into what this research is, I'm joined by four guests. They are Associate Professor Will van Wettere from the University of Adelaide, Dr. Alice Weaver from the South Australian Research and Development Institute, which is a division of the SA Department of Primary Industries and Regions, Dr. Jamee Daly from the University of Adelaide, and also Bobbie Lewis Baida, a PhD student from the University of Adelaide. All four of my guests are involved in important and fascinating research into mitigating the impact of heat stress in sheep. The overall aim of that is to improve weaning rates. It's an area of research that the SA Drought Hub is particularly interested in, as this has been identified as a high priority through the Hub's consultation process. There's a bit to get through, so Will, let's start with you. Can you give me a bit of an overview of your role in this and also an overview of the collaborative research occurring in South Australia to mitigate the impacts of heat stress in sheep?
My role within the project is project leader. I'm across what is a collaborative project between the University of Adelaide School of Animal Veterinary and Sciences and Davies Livestock Research Centre and SARDI. And the focus of a lot of our work is around mitigating the impact of heat stress on sheep reproduction and productivity through a combination of intensive research site focused work, as well as work on farms to mitigate the problem directly and alleviate the issue directly for producers.
Will, I understand this is quite a financial impact on producers that will be lessened through this process.
Yeah, so currently we expect that a high proportion of the Australian sheep flock is being affected by heat stress. And this is the impact because of when most people join their ewes to fit them with lambing times and ideal lambing times, a lot of cycling and pregnant ewes are exposed to heat stress, as well as the working rounds. They're exposed to temperatures that compromise their ability to reproduce and produce good quality eggs, get pregnant, or produce sperm. In a study that we conducted, a fairly extensive study, a review of the literature and as well the cost impact of heat stress, we worked out that in terms of a reduction in potential lambs, it's costing the Australian sheep flock around $168 million a year. And this, depending on where you are in the country, this can cost you about $15.50 per head per year. That's under current climate. Under future climate, we expect this to increase to around $203 million and around $278 million a year. And this is based on a reduction in conception rates, a reduction in pregnancy rates, and also the impact of heat stress on fetal development, which ends up with smaller lambs being born, lighter lambs, and which are less likely to survive, so reduction in postnatal survival as well.
That's quite a significant impact when you add it up like that. It's certainly a problem that needs to be resolved. So Alice, your specialty is in sheep reproduction. How do you fit into this project and how can reproductive technology help address the heat problem?
So I'm a collaborative researcher on this project. So I guess in terms of this project, I'm just there to support and help where I can. Here at Radford, we have expertise in reproductive technologies, and I guess these can be quite beneficial for addressing this problem of heat stress. In particular, we're looking at artificial insemination, and the reason this could be beneficial is because it allows us to have a greater dispersal of superior genetics, particularly from the sire side. And I guess Jamie and Bobbie will speak about this later, but sheep vary in their thermotolerance. So we could potentially select animals that have a higher temperature threshold and increase the spread of their genetics across a flock to improve the resilience of the flock overall. Some other technologies we do here at Radford is embryo transfers. So I guess a similar story to the AI, where we're increasing dispersal of superior genetics, but also on the maternal side. And we can also do things like GIVIT and MIVIT, which is juvenile in vitro embryo transfer, or mature in vitro embryo transfer. Is where we collect a large cohort of eggs from the female, fertilise them in vitro, and transfer them to recipients in the flock. Another technology we have here is the non-invasive embryo analysis, which is where we can take a little sample of the media that the embryos develop in and test them for particular genes. So whether down the track we can have a look at heat tolerance genes in animals and see if the embryos carry these genes.
Alice, there's certainly quite a lot going on there that you're researching and working on. Bobbie, let's go to you. What's your involvement in this collaboration?
So I commenced my PhD at the start of 2020, and essentially we designed my project around investigating the effects of heat stress in extensively grazed ewes and rams. And this is due to the large sort of knowledge gap that there is around understanding heat stress in sort of a real life production scenario. So majority of the work that has been done in heat stress has been through the use of climate controlled rooms or chambers to sort of try to replicate or simulate these heat events. But we still really don't have a lot of knowledge, and it's been our interest to sort of figure out what is going on in Australian grazing systems so that we can help producers manage and try to mitigate some of these negative impacts. But basically, to be able to measure the impacts of heat stress, we have to be able to quantify it at an individual level. So basically, the main focus of my project has been trying to measure some of the physiological and behavioural responses that are elicited during a heat event. And when I say quantify, traditionally that's been by sort of measuring the ambient conditions and trying to quantify the severity of the heat that they're experiencing. But what I'm really trying to understand is quantifying it in the animal at an individual physiological level. So basically, at the start of my PhD, I started working with some remote temperature sensing technology. So this records highly accurate temperature readings, which you can later download and sort of analyse. And so my first trial was validating an indwelling temperature logger in female sheep, so in the ewes. So I collaborated with some engineers from North Terrace, and we designed a intravaginal mould as a deployment technique to insert these loggers, which I then deployed intermittently throughout the previous summer. And essentially, from this information, I was able to assess individual temperature thresholds and sort of the variation that exists within a flock of sheep, and compare it to things like reproductive success. So measuring things like ovulation rate, conception rate, as well as fetal growth and survival, birth weight and body measurements postpartum as well in the lamb. We also deployed some GPS collars on some of the animals to monitor their activity and movement patterns, as well as sort of resource use in the paddock. So, time spent in the shade, time spent around the water source and things like that. So it's really quite a multi-dimensional trial, and sort of just tying all these things together to really try to identify the true impact of heat in an extensive system.
Bobbie, to say the least, there's a lot going on there and a lot of technology and a lot of partners as well. Jamie, you're a grant-funded researcher with the University of Adelaide. I'm interested in a couple of things. There's a lot of people involved, so who's funding this? And also, what's your work been around thermoregulation?
We have 2 to 3 separate funding bodies at the moment. We have 2 major projects funded by the SA Sheep Industry Fund, and one is looking around the benefits of using the melatonin implant, which is commercially available as Regulant, and its feasibility for implanting prior to joining to offset some of the negative impacts of heat stress that Will and Bobbie and Alice have already alluded to. We've got a second project funded by SIF as well that's looking specifically at the thermoregulation aspect. So that's using the sensor technology that Bobbie's developed with the engineers at North Terrace and inserting them surgically into the scrotum of rams and also into their armpits or the axilla for a core temperature measurement. But this technology we're also implementing out on farm as well. So we're going to do the fundamental basic understanding research here at Roseworthy or at the Tyrant Field Research Centre, but we're actually going to, and we have just last week deployed some of these sensor technologies in rams that are going out to work over summer, which is a fantastic use of the technology, and it's really going to help us understand how thermoregulation is affected in a real farm setting, which is going to be invaluable to the industry. So on top of that, quite intensive work as well. Through the Innovation Hub and the Drought Hub, we're looking to deploy both the sensor technology as well as the melatonin, as well as a few other supplements, including an AD&E drench and betaine and potentially vitamin C as well. All of these substances have great antioxidant potential, so they really help offset the reactive oxygen species and different molecules that will damage the embryo and the sperm quality. And these are all through the Innovation and Drought Hub, all on farm. So they're easily implementable, already farm-ready strategies that we're looking to implement. So through the Innovation Hub, we're working with Barossa Improved Grazing Group, Murray Plains Farming, as well as the McKillock Farm Management Group as well. And we've been able to extend our work through funding by the Drought Hub to reach the Upper North Farming Systems, Buckleboo, and a few other producers in some of the more pastoral areas that don't quite get as much research as well.
I'm guessing there's more work to be done, to say the least, and you've mapped some of that out. Will and Alice, what other work is the team involved in?
Going forward, we expect the current work will continue. This is going to be a long-term process, resolving heat stress, understanding drought resilience and developing strategies on farm which mitigate the problem. So alongside of this, we're doing intensive work to develop new strategies to alleviate heat stress and improve drought tolerance of animals, which, if they prove effective, will roll out into commercial properties or try and seek some way to extend and facilitate adoption of them going forward. So I think we're going to continue in this area for the foreseeable future, at least.
I think I'll just add to that. It's important to look at it over multiple seasons. So continuing this work over the next couple of years is important because we get such a huge variation in climate over summer. So extending it over multiple summer seasons is important. In terms of AI, we received some funding from the SA Sheep Industry Fund to continue some of our work on optimising estrus synchronisation to improve AI success rates. So we'll be continuing that work over the next mating season and then following through into the 2023-24 breeding season. So we'll be looking to continue our research to improve pregnancy rates in ewes that are mated over the warm summer and autumn months.
And I guess on top of that too, within these SIF industry funded projects that we have as well, we're looking at deploying the temperature sensors through the synchronisation period as well. So we can look at specifically if different animals run hotter or colder during the synchronisation period and how that actually relates to AI outcomes. Essentially, we're giving producers the opportunity to look at their animals and work out which ones are worthwhile putting into an AI and which ones you should be looking to do a natural mate or something not as costly with.
You mentioned producers there. They're obviously very important to the project. So, Alice and Jamie, how can SA sheep producers get involved?
With the Innovation and Drought Hub, we've been working quite closely with Stephen Lee and Tony Randell. So a lot of the work in those two spaces, in the first instance, we have the producers groups contact those guys directly, and then we get forwarded through their information through Steve and Tony. And I think they're employing more officers as well to help facilitate that communication between us as researchers and the producer groups as well. Alternatively, they can, most definitely contact any of us directly through our emails or giving us a phone call as well. If they don't tie quite closely to a producer group but are still interested in the work, we're more than happy to help facilitate taking this research out onto their farm.
In terms of future research, is there going to be more focus also on the use of supplements?
We're always looking to develop strategies which can be implemented on farm to alleviate heat stress. And the logical ways to do that are to provide animals with supplements, additional vitamins, compounds that help the body protect them from heat stress that can actually be implemented on farm. So continuing to develop these supplements is probably one of the avenues of research that we will continue to progress. They can be easily implemented.
On top of that, by ways to implement that is whether that's going through the feed, going through the water as a drench or a long-acting supplement in the rumen or subcutaneous implant like the melatonin. So I guess our research into supplements is which supplements are useful, but what is the best method to actually have them out on farm.
Will, Alice, Jamie and Bobbie, remarkable work that you're all involved with and answering a significant question that's going to help drive forth the Australian sheep industry. Thank you all for taking the time and joining us for this SA Drought Hub podcast.
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Drew.
Pleasure.
Thank you for your time.
And that concludes this podcast. You'll find more podcasts on the SA Drought Hub website at sadroughthub.com.au. The South Australian Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub is one of 8 hubs established across the nation through the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. The SA Drought Hub is an exciting initiative which brings together a dynamic network of primary producers, industry groups, researchers, government agencies, universities, agribusinesses, farming systems groups, traditional owners and others to work towards a common vision to strengthen the drought resilience and preparedness of farms and regional communities in SA. Led by the University of Adelaide in partnership with the Department of Primary Industries and Regions South Australia, the Hub is responsible for driving the extension of existing knowledge and practices to build drought resilience in primary production systems.